In 1954, then Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev decided that Crimea, a peninsula in the Black Sea, should be part of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic instead of the Russian one. And so it was transferred. And so it stayed Ukrainian territory even after the breakup of the Soviet Union. But in 2014, Russia took it back with force. Today, many have suggested that Russia will never let it go and Ukraine can never get it back. My next guest begs to differ. Retired General Ben Hodges, the former commanding general of U.S. Army Europe, wrote about his view in a recent piece in The Economist. He joins me now. Welcome, General Hodges. Let me first ask you what you make of the state of play right now, given that we've been hearing all this talk about the Germans giving tanks, the Americans giving Abrams tanks. What is happening on the ground with?
Well, it's important that the United States and Germany and UK and others are finally delivering this sort of capability that would give Ukraine overwhelming combat power for an armored thrust that would be an important part of the next counteroffensive. My only regret is that it's taken so long, and it's still going to be months before the American contribution, the Abrams tanks specifically, can be part of this.
Is there a big Russian advance being planned from what you can tell on the ground? It does seem like there's a bit of a stalemate right now. What's going on as you see it?
I would not call it a stalemate, because a stalemate implies that both sides are doing everything they can and you just can't move either way. I would say actually right now we are in this phase of the war where both sides are preparing for the next mobile phase of the war. The Russians, of course, have talked a lot about the next round of mobilization. You hear even the Ukrainians talk about there might be 500,000 Russian soldiers that are being mobilized. I'm very skeptical about those numbers. And of course, the Russians want us to be worried and thinking about a looming offensive so that we're focused on that rather than focused on the main effort, which is helping Ukraine liberate Crimea.
So tell us why you think, just first strategically, this is the right thing to do, because a lot of people say, look, this was Russian until Khrushchev gave it in 1954, that this would be Putin's red line, that this would be the one thing, it is 95% Russian speaking. This is the one area that Ukraine should not go into. You on the contrary, say very much it is the place that Ukraine should stage an invasion.
So it's important to remember, of course, that everybody, including the United States, recognizes that Crimea is sovereign territory of Ukraine. So there's no disputing the sovereignty of Crimea as part of Ukraine. I can't imagine a situation where it would be a good idea for Ukraine to go ahead and give up Crimea. Crimea is the decisive part of this war. Ukraine will never be stable or safe or secure as long as Russian forces still occupy Crimea. And they'll never be able to rebuild their economy as long as the Russian fleet is there sailing out of Sevastopol, interdicting traffic coming in and out of Odessa. So in terms of what's decisive, how can we press Ukraine to go ahead and give up Crimea?
Okay, so now explain to us why it's doable militarily. I mean, Russia is a much bigger country. This is a matter of pride for them. They're much bigger economy, defense budget, and yet you say this is doable.
Yeah. So I'm not so sure that it's a matter of pride for all Russians. You'll remember 500,000 Russians left the country last year rather than be mobilized. I'm sure they like going down to Crimea to the Black Sea for their holiday, as we saw last summer, but there are no Russian soldiers that want to be in Ukraine. War is a test of will and a test of logistics. The Russian logistics system is barely able to supply the Russian troops that it has in the field right now. The Russian Black Sea fleet is terrified of going anywhere near the Ukrainian coast, and Ukraine doesn't even have a navy. So I think when you start comparing populations and logistical systems, Ukraine does not have a manpower problem. They've got over 700,000 people in uniform and another 2 million that are ready to step forward. And of course, willpower. It's very clear that Ukrainians have the superior will, the soldiers as well as the people. What Russia has, and I think this is what you're alluding to, what Russia has, of course, is mass. They don't care how many get killed. We see that. They're losing between 600 and 800 people a day killed. They'll keep pushing those troops into the meat grinder in hopes of eventually overwhelming Ukrainian defenders. But as the SACEUR says, General Cavoli, Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, precision can defeat mass if you have enough time.
How likely is it that you think the Ukrainians are going to take your advice?
Well, one thing I'm sure of is that they are absolutely going to keep fighting to get back Crimea, because they know they will never be safe or secure, and they know they'll never be able to rebuild their economy. And they also know, based on the history of the last 30 years, that Russia will never live up to any agreement, but the Russians will wait for us to lose interest, as we did after the invasion of Georgia back in 2008. So I think this is why Ukraine realizes this year this needs to happen now. And it's got to be very frustrating for them when they hear the Joint Staff or the Pentagon or the administration talk about, oh, it's going to be very hard. I don't think they can defeat them this year. And then that's used as the reason not to provide capabilities that would help them win this year. So kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think this is a manifestation of the fact that the administration just cannot bring themselves to say they want Ukraine to actually win. Instead, we talk about we want them to be successful, or we don't want them to lose. And that's why we stop short of providing what's needed.